Excited delirium, succinylcholine, and hyperkalemia. That's what's up next on the Viral Unpacking Podcast. I'm excited to bring you a gem of a video that I found recently, and I think it hit today, and this is ShadeTreeCardiology. Guys, if you're not tracking ShadeTreeCardiology, sorry, buddy, he's amazing. He's funny, very intelligent. I mean, like, off the chart intelligent. Right now, I hate saying it, like, he's really smart for a paramedic. I mean, the dude has got literally the mind of a resident or potentially a first or second year attending. I mean, dude is very, very smart. Knows deep science, and I know he got a lot of this. He's told me from military and some really, really good training with some docs, and just an amazing dude. So, all right, today he's talking about succinylcholine in excited delirium, and real excited to kind of go over this and let's unpack this.
Good morning, TikTok.
Morning.
We gotta talk. Now, in the Molly video where I talked about someone who was definitely in a delirious state, there were quite a few comments on that video where people said give them succinylcholine. And I've also
So if somebody has excited delirium and then we're going to give them succinylcholine, that's not a sedative, right? I have a video here where I go off on this whole bit. So go ahead and look. And this is the Angry Medic. This is the first Angry Medic where, here, I'll show you this. If you've never seen this, this is one of my favorites.
This is just awesome, man. That's just awesome. Got your intubated patient you're going to try to take care of for a little while. You're going to get them intubated, and you're going to sedate them with friggin' rhodium.
All right, so we don't sedate with succinylcholine. Now, what's awesome here is he's going to get into it, and again, 3 minutes is all that he really has. You could go longer, but then, of course, with the metrics on socials, people, we want quick information. We want to get the heck out of there, right? So, but he's about to drop down into some really, really interesting chemistry and deep pharmacology here.
also seen this make its way into the ketamine videos where we talk about sedation of someone who's in a state of excited delirium, the PCP one in fact. We do not RSI excited delirium patients. We do not RSI patients who are hard to deal with. Now apart from...
So, really good point here. This is in general, and for the most part, in the air medical world, where we're going to put a patient into the back of an aircraft. Sometimes they're really close to the pilot. Sometimes they're sequestered from the pilot, and stuck back into a rear compartment with the flight crew. So here's where it gets interesting. Now, I don't disagree with him 99% of the time, but there are times, maybe 90%, 90, because there are times where it's like, all right, if we can't get this person to calm down, we can't put them in an aircraft and let them go berserk, right? So it's a big deal that we need to figure out. Is there something we can do to calm them down? And sometimes that includes sedation, which is not succinylcholine. But the problem, of course, we get into is if there's too much sedation and then they're not breathing, and now we need to get them intubated because of iatrogenically we've made them so sedate that they're not taking enough breaths, and they start to desat, and their end tidal begins to rise, and all the worst parts of hypoxia. So the thought there is, like, ideally, he's right. You don't just intubate for the heck of it, but there are times where you might have to intubate a combative patient. That's a common thing in air medicine. It's not something that we take lightly. And again, when I think through when I'm talking to people and I'm talking about like an ideal situation, we're talking about the majority of people, hopefully like 80%, generally do the right thing. You got that 10% that are really awesome and the 10% that are just really bad, but of those 80%, the mean, like what I think mostly happens in the air medical world, what I know happens with the group the groups that I've worked with has been, you do what you can to prevent having to intubate them. But if there's a place where they need to be intubated because they're going to just go berserk, then it is what it is. I would probably take a step rarely we're going to go pick up an excited delirium patient unless something else is going on anyway. He is going to get us some hyperkalemia here in a second, which again is awesome. My point here is I just wanted to take a moment and mention, he said, we don't RSI patients that are hard to handle. We don't RSI patients that are in excited delirium in general. But if you're going to put them in an aircraft, and the cool thing here is there's a handful of people that, there's somebody that asked about it. Oh, here we go. KTA 2090 says, do we RSI hard to deal with patients if they're getting on an aircraft? I've seen it a few times. Let's see these replies here. Jake Hinton, I don't know Jake, but this was funny. State offices entered the chat. Just kind of making sure, well, we be on our P's and Q's. And then KTA 2090 responds again. I saw a flight medic drop 300 of fentanyl once on scene to an unruly patient. That's a lot, but it's not unfounded. We give a little bit, we give a little bit, we give a little bit. And, in the end, it's like, fentanyl might not be the best thing for excited delirium. I mean, I would probably go with, like a antipsychotic and a benzo if needed. Maybe the antipsychotic if possible at first, and then a benzo, or the combination of the two. And a lot of times it's droperidol and Versed, or it's the what we used to call 10 and 2 where I'm from, and that's lorazepam and not droperidol. What's that other one? Haloperidol. And so anyway, sometimes you use combinations of those two. And it's funny that the guy mentioned that, but in the end, if you're going to put them in an aircraft, it's possible that we might have to intubate them, but we're going to try to do everything we can to not have to intubate them. And that goes with most patients. Flew a patient not long ago that is a trauma patient, and they were just they were with it when you'd ask questions, but they didn't want to be sitting down. They were ETOH, and I really debated on intubating them, and I ended up not. But I had to babysit that person, so that's one of those things. All right, let's get back here.
From the fact that this is excruciatingly unethical and there should be no other reason, let me give you a chemical reason. Because there's always one guy that's going to need it to personally affect them before they'll not do it. Hear me out. In what class does succinylcholine
He's so right, he's
fall?
funny.
That's right, it is a depolarizing neuromuscular blocker. Now, what happens when a muscle depolarizes?
I got this one. So when you depolarize that muscle, the whole point is, in non-depolarizing, acetylcholine doesn't cross the motor end plate. In depolarizing, acetylcholine does cross that motor end plate, and that's going from nerve terminal to muscle. And so with acetylcholine, sounds a lot like succinylcholine, right? And that's why we use succinylcholine, is because we give it goes into the vasculature, it gets into tissues, it finds the nerves, crosses over from the nerve to a muscle. And just like acetylcholine, and now normally acetylcholine sits into the receptor and is quickly chewed up and kicked out so that the receptor's open again. Succinylcholine sticks around a while, about 3 to 5 minutes-ish. And so it takes up that space and it won't leave for about 3 to 5 minutes, and finally it is cleaved out of the receptor, and the muscle can now move again. But it basically induces a bit of paralysis, and that's the neuromuscular, that's the depolarizing part. There's a problem with it. When we do that, we get a little bit of, every single time that in normal physiology, acetylcholine lands into a receptor, a tiny bit of potassium is released, right? And what happens is when you give succinylcholine, it's the same thing. It gets in the receptor and a little bit of potassium is released. But there's a problem, and I'll explain here in a minute. I'll let him finish. I don't want to steal his thunder. The whole point of these is just to kind of get a deep understanding, because they only have 3.5 minutes or 3 minutes. And anyway, let's let him get back to it. But I'll come back and really dig into that acetylcholine versus succinylcholine.
Just in case you don't know, let me make it quick.
Hit me.
Muscle cells are loaded with potassium. The vast majority of potassium in the human body sits inside the muscle cell. When combined with different proteins, it likes to keep a cell negative, or what we call in a resting state. When the muscle is ready to depolarize, it will open voltage-gated channels. Sodium will begin to influx, followed by calcium, and the muscle will be depolarized. Now, when potassium is normal and a patient enters a state of excited delirium, they will begin to use their muscles at an accelerated rate. Their body temperature will skyrocket in certain cases. All of this activity is going to cause some of the muscle cells to die, and they will spill their contents out into the bloodstream.
He's about to say, among them is potassium. One way that I used to memorize this is the phrase next of kin. Spell the word next, N-E-X-T, kin, K-I-N. N for sodium, E-X-T, that's the extracellular fluids. Sodium is found in extracellular spaces. but kin, K for potassium, IN, intracellular. Potassium is on the inside of cells. So when they get all excited and delirious, it's like anytime you're working out, your muscles, some of the cells will rupture. A lot of potassium spills out. So what happens is now we're putting them in a position where they already have a lot of potassium, and we give succinylcholine. When your body wants to move a muscle, it releases just a tiny, tiny amount of acetylcholine, just the right amount, and our bodies move. But when we give succinylcholine, we give like millions and millions and millions and millions times the normal amount of acetylcholine. So typically we have like still just enough receptors, but we just give it's all this extra acetylcholine / succinylcholine part, so they get into the receptor and stay there. So you in a situation where you have a lot of potassium that's already out there from them being excited delirium and potentially revving up, their musculature and getting fired up, and then that could damage that, could rupture some of the muscle cells that just happen normally when we exercise and what have you, and that can increase your potassium. And now we're giving succinylcholine, which could increase it further. This is not the case in critical care that we typically see this situation, but I'll cover that in a second. But that's where he's about to go.
Among those contents is an astronomical amount of potassium. Now, to put this in the proper frame of reference, if they give you a lethal injection because you've done some super bad things, the last drug they give you is an overdose of potassium. It causes cardiac arrest. It's what kills your dialysis patients when they don't go to dialysis. So when you have someone who's either in a hyperkalemic state or borderlining on it, and you give them a depolarizing neuromuscular blocker, every muscle in the body will depolarize at once. If you've ever given this drug, you saw this happen as the wave. Remember?
Talk about fasciculations. When you give a depolarizing, you'll sit there and you'll wait and you're watching the patient, and typically from about the toes coming up toward the head, it's fasciculating, and that's what he's talking about, the wave. And those fasciculations, and like it'll usually end in their face, and you start rubbing your finger over their eyelashes, and if they don't budge, then typically they're probably most likely paralyzed. Now again, the point here is succinylcholine has a risk of increasing potassium release. And again, that is bad because, and imagine your heart, like we give for hyperkalemia, we give calcium is one of the main things that we give. And the reason we do that is because your body, if it has a whole bunch of potassium that's now in the vasculature, so you're hyperkalemic, your potassium's high in the vasculature, inside the cells, i.e. your heart cells, the body has a bunch of potassium. And so now you have a bunch of potassium on the inside and outside. The body doesn't really recognize that there's really any difference of voltage. And so we give a bunch of calcium to basically drown that out and make it a little bit more recognizable. And so calcium is important, but he's going into the thought process and management of it. Let's continue.
And now we have dumped a figurative metric shit ton of potassium into a bloodstream, into a body that is not ready for that. Furthermore, there is an inverse relationship between potassium and pH in the body. Simply put, when the potassium goes up, the acid goes up. There are 3 things your body demands of you
in vasculature. So one of the things that we get, the other thing we give with hyperkalemia, we give calcium, like we just mentioned. We also give bicarb, and the reason we give bicarb is because as your body is looking, let's say that some of the cells are staring into the vasculature as it goes by, and it's like picking water when it needs it, nutrient when it needs it, kind of like a conveyor belt, like at a cafeteria or like a fancy seafood place where the conveyor belt comes by. You just take what you want. Well, that's what the cells do. So as the cells watch the conveyor belt go by, the vasculature go by, it will say, oh, well, there's a bunch of potassium in there. You know what? I can help fix this. I will grab a potassium and put it back inside the cell. So out of the vasculature, back inside the cell. In exchange, because nothing's for free, I'll drop in some acid. I'll drop in a hydrogen ion. So it takes a potassium ion and exchanges it for a hydrogen ion, which is acid. And so what happens there is we can have an acidosis built just from the body trying to compensate with all this extra potassium in the vasculature. So that's one of the main reasons we give bicarb in hyperkalemia, we give the calcium to protect the heart so that it can see the difference in voltage. We give the bicarb to help attenuate that acid. And then, of course, we give, going down the ladder or a little bit further, giving dextrose and insulin. And it seems like weird why we do that, but what we're really trying to do is, the way that you can conceptually think of it is, D50 is sticky. If you've ever gotten it on your hands or whatever, it's sugar. It's very concentrated, so it's sticky. Well, potassium sticks to it as well, and then you give insulin to push the potassium / glucose molecule out of the vasculature back into the cell. So the insulin in that case acts as a hall monitor, and the sugar just acts as like a buddy to help get his buddy out of the hallways and back into class, i.e. the cells. So that's the main management of hyperkalemia. There's a couple others. We'll go over that next, but he's gonna let's let him go. Continue here.
For its function. Everything must happen at a certain temperature, at a certain pressure, and at a certain pH. You have absolutely killed 2 of those with that action. And this is nothing new and should make perfect sense to you. There are other conditions wherein we don't give succinylcholine. Remember burns? It's for the same reason. 24 hours after that burn, the fluid shift is complete. The hyperkalemia is where it's going to be. You cannot afford to dump a medication that will dump potassium on top of all the potassium being released by the burned and damaged body cells. So what's the grand result of all this? Cardiac arrest in a nutshell. So to sum it all up, never give succinylcholine to a delirium patient. Good morning.
So he does a really good job, again, of going over a little bit of management, a lot of pharmacology here. And to summarize, and he's being real specific with delirium patients. I mean, we don't just intubate them randomly, just because. If they're going to be put in an aircraft, let's try some other things first. So let's try to, all of the calming and try to keep them calm. If that doesn't work, we can do soft restraints. If they're just really fighting you, then we can consider like an antipsychotic if you have time. You could also give them a little bit of sedative, probably more likely in the air medical or the critical care transport environment. We're probably going to be considering, maybe a benzo like lorazepam or Versed to calm them down. Sometimes you might have to pair the 2 together. You might need a benzo and an antipsychotic, like the 10 and 2, which is 10 milligrams of droperidol, 2 milligrams of Ativan. That's the 10 and 2 cocktail and cocktails are typically like regional. Everybody's got a little different name. Like even we were talking earlier about calcium, bicarb, insulin, glucose. In Mississippi here, we call that Reuben's cocktail, and I think in the Southeast it's called Reuben's. I've been out to the Northeast and Eastern Seaboard and then out West, and they don't really understand what I'm talking about typically when I say Reuben's. But nonetheless, what we're talking about is for the delirium patient, 10 and 2, which is 10 of haloperidol, 2 of lorazepam is an option. You can also do droperidol and Versed is options, but we don't intubate them just because. There has to be a reason. Can they protect the airway? Okay, great. Then let's try to calm them down. So he's right, and we don't just randomly do that. If they need to go to the hospital and they're not, they're not in their right mind and they're being combative, then technically we can intubate those patients. But we don't just do it because they have delirium, excited delirium. He also went into talking about succinylcholine, the problems with succinylcholine. Now, if we talk about, he mentioned burns a second ago and hyperkalemia. So here's the contraindications for succinylcholine. Of course, existing hyperkalemia. We could see that with if you have the ability, or if they just had a recent lab and you're picking up hospital to hospital. If you pick them in the field, then you don't have the ability to run a potassium, because a high potassium, like 5.5 or more, is indicative of potential management with symptoms. You can also look at their T wave. If their T wave is tall and peaked and pointy, then that's clinical hyperkalemia until proven otherwise, so that you can begin to treat it. And honestly, like people ask, well, when do you treat it? Like, well, okay, if it's me and I see a tall pointy T wave, I don't just rush and start dumping all that stuff in. I need to see what the rest of their symptomology is. But then also, if once like that T wave will get to a certain height and it won't get any higher. And once it starts widening out, that's without question, the last straw. I will give calcium bicarb, insulin, glucose if I have the latter two, but for sure calcium first and then bicarb to try to attenuate the growing hyperkalemia. So that's management for that. Going back to, let's see what we're talking about. Going back to the going back to the contraindications. So hyperkalemia burns after 24 hours because it takes 24. I mean, so if it's within 12, you're totally fine. Within 20, totally fine-ish. But like I usually just, I don't use succinylcholine on my burn patients, just inherently. You can, there might be times that you need to. Let's talk for another video. You could give crush injury right away because you've crushed the tissues and they've spilled a bunch of potassium. The one that's really, really important that Greg didn't mention here, that ShadeTree didn't mention here, was neuromuscular problems. Okay, so patients that don't have a neuromuscular, that their muscles and their nerves don't talk very well, so they don't move their muscles. So CP patients, muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, all these diseases where their muscles, don't move very well. All of those muscles, basically, they want to move, and so they constantly are looking inward and say, "Hey, why aren't we moving? I don't understand." And so it'll say, maybe it's because we don't have a enough acetylcholine receptors. So where in a field where in like a muscle where there might be one receptor, it might put 100, 300, 500, 1,000 extra receptors. It's called upregulation. And so it'll upregulate, it'll build a bunch of receptors. And so when normally acetylcholine, a tiny bit sprinkled in, it's just, it'll find its way to one of those receptors and the muscle's like, well, then we'll have muscular action. But when we show up and we give succinylcholine to patients with neuromuscular problems, all of a sudden we have millions and millions and millions of particles all in millions and millions and millions of receptors. A lot of potassium is released. And I'll tell the story sometime soon how I killed a kid. Maybe I'll do a part 2. Who knows? But I got him back. But I say it that way only because the kid went into cardiac arrest because his potassium got unbelievably high. And so we worked the problem. We fixed it, got him back. I still stalk the kid on Facebook, making sure that he looks developmentally perfect. That was a very long time ago. He's in his teens now. But the point there is you can work it. You can fix it. But he had an undiagnosed neuromuscular problem. We gave succinylcholine, and we flooded all of those extra receptors, and he went into massive hyperkalemia. And so we had to work the problem. Again, to fix it, calcium, bicarb, insulin, glucose. Going down the rabbit hole even further, of course, we have albuterol, which will help shuttle potassium back into the cell. You also can give Kxalate, which actually is one of the few things that pulls potassium out of the digestive tract into fecal matter, and therefore it's actually totally out. It's one of the only things that actually removes potassium from the body. And then of course we could get them somewhere where they can get dialysis. So that's the management. We talked about the contraindications. This was a great video. He got into succinylcholine and stuff, and some of the other stuff here with the comments. There's some interesting ones here. Intubation and heart procedure, knowing when and how to perform and manages the hard part. This dude's dead on right. So getting him intubated is, it is what it is, especially with RSI medications. We give the sedative so they don't remember it. We give the paralytic so that we can just manipulate all this muscular, tissue with that spoon, that laryngoscope, and it makes it way easier when it's really relaxed. But he does go into, says, sucks needs to go. There are far too many examples how it will kill everyone. As far as I can tell, the only benefit is a short half-life, which comes back to the point to train the medics how to do it properly, and it doesn't matter. The patient's down for 40 minutes. So, I've really researched this with a bunch of anesthesiologists, and most of them will never tell you that it has to go. There is good times for it, and maybe we'll make a follow-up. Maybe that'll be episode 2, a little bit of a follow-up with it, because it seems to be a topic that everybody likes to talk about and debate. And I mean, again, I rarely use it as much anymore, but there are times where I still use it. And and being prepared for what happens next. Maybe in the next episode we'll talk about malignant hyperthermia as well. Maybe I'll look for one that has that in there. But it's pretty good. He's got a lot of good people that are saying good stuff about him here, and yeah, this is a good call, Rock Goblin. To be fair, the final step in excited delirium control is RSI, but you need to have tried a lot of other things first. Totally agree. And even then, like, I wouldn't even be, in my management of excited delirium, I never think RSI. I mean, they have to be danger of themselves and losing an airway before that's even a thing. But I think that's what he's talking about here. We use it for RSI. I'm an RN, not EMS field personnel, though. And I think somebody had a fun, like, that's the only reason EMS has it too. That's the only reason we give succinylcholine. Yeah, that's funny. But anyway, he's got a lot of good stuff here. Why the heck are people? That doesn't mean heck. Why the heck are people still doing that? So yeah, why are they doing it? Period. For excited delirium, we come back. I hope they're not. I hope it's for another reason. Just because inherently excited delirium, we wouldn't do it. But anyway, ShadeTreeCardiology, go check him out. Really good stuff. And thanks for listening, the viral Unpacking podcast. And we'll see you next episode.